You're standing on a dock somewhere, and there she is, a squat, high-bowed motor yacht from the 1970s, teak trim gone gray, sitting low and solid in the water while the shiny new plastic boats around her bob like corks. And you think to yourself, that old thing has probably outlived 3 of these newer ones. You'd be right. These boats were built to outlive their owners, and most of them have. Here's what I couldn't believe when I first heard it. A motor yacht built in 1973, bought today for less than the price of a new pickup truck, will very likely still be running strong when boats built this year are already in the landfill. I thought that was nostalgia talking. I was wrong, and I'm going to show you exactly why. By the end of this, I'll hand you a hull inspection trick that surveyors have quietly used since the 1960s, one you can do this weekend with a coin from your pocket. And this matters whether you own a boat, dream of one, or just want to understand why the old ways of building things beat the new ones almost every time. I want to take you back to a boatyard I walked through one cold October morning a few years ago. The travel lift was hauling out an old trawler for winter storage, and I watched the yard manager knock his knuckles against her hull and just smile. I asked him why. He said, "They don't make the glass this thick anymore. This boat'll be here after I'm gone." That sentence stuck in me like a hook, and it sent me down a road I'm still on today. Because I used to believe the marketing. I really did. I believed that newer meant better, that a boat built with computers and modern chemistry had to be stronger than something a bunch of men laid up by hand in a shed in Asia 50 years ago. So I started digging. I read old construction manuals. I called surveyors. I crawled through engine rooms that smelled like diesel and history. And every single thing I found told me the same story. We forgot how to build boats that last, and 5 designs from the 1970s prove it. Let me start with the one that changed my mind first, the Grand Banks 42. I'll be honest with you. When I first climbed aboard one, I laughed a little. It looked old-fashioned, slow, boxy, like a floating cabin from another century. And that's exactly what fooled me, because that boat is one of the most respected passage-making motor yachts ever built, and there's a reason you still see them crossing oceans today. The Grand Banks came from a company called American Marine, founded by a man named Robert Newton. He set up shop first in Hong Kong, then moved the whole operation to Singapore. The 42 first appeared in the middle 1960s as a wooden boat, planked in teak over oak frames. But here's the turning point. In 1973, they switched the 42 to fiberglass, and something remarkable happened in that transition. The men building these boats didn't trust the new material yet. Fiberglass was still young, so instead of making the hulls as thin as the engineering allowed, they made them absurdly, gloriously thick. They overbuilt out of caution. A Grand Banks 42 hull from that era can measure well over an inch of solid, hand-laid fiberglass down low near the keel. No foam core, no air pockets. Just layer after layer of glass and resin worked in by hand. I've since learned that a modern production boat of similar size might have a hull less than half that thickness in places, with a foam or balsa core sandwiched in the middle to save weight and cost. And that core is exactly where water gets in and rot begins. The old Grand Banks has nothing to rot. It's solid all the way through. You can find a Grand Banks 42 today for anywhere between $80,000 and $150,000, depending on condition. And people gladly pay it, because a well-kept one holds its value in a way new boats simply cannot. A new boat loses a huge share of its price the moment it leaves the dealer. These old trawlers stopped falling in value decades ago, and some are climbing back up. So I understood, standing there, why that yard manager smiled. But then a bigger question hit me, one that kept me up that night. If they knew how to build hulls this strong in 1973, why did they ever stop? That question is the whole story, and the answer only gets darker from here. Now, if this way of thinking, this idea of tracing things back to first principles to understand why something was built the way it was, and using that knowledge to make smarter decisions today, resonates with you, then I want to tell you about a book I wrote called First Principles, which is part of a three-part system that also includes deep leverage and the full system. These books are built around the same approach you're watching right now, stripping away the marketing, going back to what actually works, and applying those lessons across every area of your life. You'll find the link in the description below. Take a look when you're done here, because I think you'll recognize yourself in every page. But I still had a skeptic's doubt gnawing at me. Maybe these were flukes, maybe just a couple of stubborn builders. Therefore, I went looking for the boat that supposedly started the whole fiberglass revolution, the one that should have been the flimsiest of all. And what I found there flipped everything I thought I knew. Because someone, somewhere, decided that a boat lasting 50 years was a problem to be solved, not a triumph to be celebrated. Think about it from a builder's side. If you sell a man a boat that lasts him the rest of his life, you sell him exactly one boat. But if that boat needs replacing in 15 or 20 years, you've sold him 3. The math is brutal, and it's simple, and it started reshaping how boats were built before most owners ever noticed. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the second design taught me something even the grand banks couldn't. Let me tell you about the DeFever 44, and the man behind it. His name was Arthur DeFever, a naval architect out of San Diego, California. He wasn't a marketing man, he was an engineer who studied how commercial fishing boats survived brutal seas year after year, and he took those hard lessons and folded them into pleasure yachts for ordinary people. That's the part I love. He didn't design for the boat show. He designed for the storm. DeFever's trawlers, built through the 1970s mostly in yards in Taiwan, carried a hull shape with a deep, soft chine and a full keel running the length of the boat. Now here's why that matters to you, even if you never set foot on one. That full keel does 2 things. It protects the propeller and rudder if you run aground, and it lets the boat keep tracking straight and steady in a following sea instead of getting thrown around. It's the difference between a boat that fights the ocean and one that works with it. I spoke to an owner who'd taken his DeFever from California down to Mexico and back more times than he could count. He told me he'd never once felt unsafe. He said the boat felt like it wanted to keep him alive. And when I asked him what he'd spent on major structural repairs in 20 years of ownership, he laughed and said, "Structural? Nothing. She's built like a bank vault." That word stuck with me. Nothing. 20 years, and nothing structural. Compare that to what I kept hearing from people with newer boats: delamination, soft decks, blisters, stringers pulling loose, repairs running into the tens of thousands of dollars before the boat had even reached its 20th birthday. The DeFever asks for paint, oil changes, and respect. That's it. Arthur DeFever kept designing boats almost until he passed away in 2013, well past his 90th year. The man dedicated his entire life to the idea that a boat should be honest, strong, and safe. And the market slowly moved away from everything he stood for, not because his ideas failed, because his ideas worked too well. So now I had 2 boats telling me the same thing: overbuilt, solid, nearly immortal. But I still had a skeptic's doubt gnawing at me. Maybe these were flukes, maybe just a couple of stubborn builders. Therefore, I went looking for the boat that supposedly started the whole fiberglass revolution, the one that should have been the flimsiest of all. And what I found there flipped everything I thought I knew. That boat came from a company called Hatteras. Hatteras Yachts was founded in 1959 by a man named Willis Slane in High Point, North Carolina. And the story of why he started it tells you everything. Slane loved to fish offshore, But the wooden boats of his day kept getting torn apart by the rough waters off Cape Hatteras, the stretch of coast so dangerous sailors called it the graveyard of the Atlantic. He wanted a boat that could take that beating and come home. So he turned to fiberglass when almost nobody trusted it for big boats. The very first Hatteras, a 41-footer, launched in 1960, and by the time the 1970s rolled around, Hatteras was building large motor yachts, like the 53-foot motor yacht, that became legendary for one reason above all others: weight. These boats were heavy, enormously, deliberately heavy. People joke that Hatteras built boats like other people built bomb shelters. Here's the thing I didn't understand at first. In the boat world, heavy is not an insult. Heavy means thick glass. Heavy means real wood, real bronze, real bulkheads bonded solidly to the hull. Heavy means a boat that doesn't flex and crack every time it slams into a wave. A Hatteras from the 1970s feels, when you walk through it, less like a boat and more like a building that happens to float. And they're still out there, thousands of them. You can buy a 1970s Hatteras Motor Yacht today, a genuinely large, comfortable, ocean-capable vessel, for a fraction of what a new boat half its quality would cost. I've seen solid ones change hands for well under $100,000. The engines in them, usually big, slow-turning diesels, are the kind mechanics call million-mile engines because they were designed to run at low speeds forever with basic maintenance. But this is where the story turns, and this is the part I need you to hear, because it's bigger than boats. Somewhere in the decades that followed, the industry figured out that all that strength cost money. Every extra layer of glass was resin you had to pay for. Every solid bronze fitting was more expensive than a cheap alternative. Every pound of extra weight meant a bigger, thirstier engine. So the accountants started asking a question the old builders never asked. Not how strong can we make it, but how weak can we get away with? And that question changed everything. They started using cord hulls, that foam and balsa sandwich I mentioned, to cut weight and material cost. They started thinning the glass. They started using less resin, sometimes so little that the fiberglass wasn't fully saturated, leaving microscopic voids where water would eventually creep in. They replaced bronze with cheaper metals that corrode. They stopped bonding bulkheads with the care the old yards insisted on. And they wrapped all of it in a glossy gel coat and clever advertising that made a weaker boat look more advanced. The result is a generation of boats that look beautiful in the showroom and start falling apart in 15 years. Not by accident, by design. Because a boat that lasts forever is a boat you only sell once. I know how that sounds. I resisted believing it myself for a long time, but when I lined up the construction methods side by side, when I held a piece of 1970s solid glass in one hand and read the specifications for a modern cord hull in the other, I couldn't pretend anymore. The old boats weren't better by luck. The new boats were made worse on purpose. Now, I know some of you are listening to this thinking, this is all very interesting, but I'm never going to buy an old motor yacht, so what does any of this have to do with me? I made this next part especially for you, because the lesson these boats teach reaches into every corner of your life, and I'm going to show you how to use it starting today. Here's the principle. Stripped of the salt water. Things that were overbuilt in the past are almost always a better value than things built cheaply today, and you can apply that to your house, your tools, your appliances, and your money right now. Walk through your own home and look at what actually lasts. The cast iron pan your grandmother used is still cooking, while the non-stick pans you buy peel and die in 2 years. The solid wood dresser from a estate sale will outlast 3 particle board ones from the big box store. The old hand tools with wooden handles, the ones with a name and a date stamped in the steel, still work perfectly, while the plastic-handled versions crack in the cold. This is the exact same story as the boats, just smaller and closer to home. So here is what I want you to do this week. and it costs you nothing. Before you buy anything new, ask one simple question. Was the old version of this built better? For furniture, tools, cookware, and even things like sewing machines and hand mixers, the answer is almost always yes, and the old version costs a fraction of the new one at estate sales, auctions, and second-hand listings. I furnished half my workshop this way, and I have not replaced a single piece. And here is the money part. When you buy the durable old thing instead of the disposable new thing, you stop being a customer who pays over and over. You buy once. That old cast iron pan might cost you $10 or $15 second-hand and serve you for the rest of your life. The non-stick pan costs $30, and you'll buy it again and again, spending far more in the end for far less. Durability is not just quality. Durability is savings. It's the same reason that old trawler is a better deal than the shiny new boat, scaled down to something sitting on your kitchen shelf. I told you this part was for the folks who thought the boats didn't apply to them. But now let me bring you back to the water, because the fourth design broke a rule I thought could never be broken. Everyone knows fiberglass is what modern boats are made of. So what would you say if I told you one of the toughest motor yachts of the 1970s wasn't fiberglass at all? It was steel. I'm talking about the Chris Craft Roamer. Now, Chris Craft is a name most people connect with those gorgeous varnished wooden runabouts from the mid-century, the ones you see gliding across lakes in old films. But Chris Craft also built a line called the Roamer, and the Roamers were made of steel, welded up in their plant in Michigan. And later versions used a special steel that resisted corrosion far better than ordinary steel. When I first heard about a steel pleasure yacht, my skeptic's brain went straight to the obvious problem: steel rusts. Wouldn't a steel boat just dissolve? That's what I assumed. And that's exactly the assumption that made me miss the genius of it. Here's what a steel hull gives you that fiberglass never can. If you hit a submerged log, a rock, or a floating shipping container in the middle of the night, a fiberglass hull can crack or puncture and sink you. A steel hull dents. It bends. It takes the blow and keeps the water out. Commercial ships are made of steel for exactly this reason. The Roamer brought that ship-grade toughness down to a size a regular family could own. And yes, steel needs care. You have to keep the paint up and keep water from sitting where it shouldn't. But a Roamer that's been maintained is one of the strongest boats you can buy, and because so many people share my old fear of steel, they often sell for less than they're worth. The people who understand them treasure them. I met one owner who called his Roamer the last boat I'll ever need, and after crawling through his engine room, I believed him. What amazed me most was the welding. These hulls were welded by hand by men who took real pride in a clean, strong seam. It's craftsmanship you cannot buy at any price in a modern production line. And it points to the thing all 5 of these boats share, the real secret underneath all of it. These boats were built by people who expected them to last, working for companies that hadn't yet learned to see durability as a threat to profit. But I saved the most humble of the 5 for last, because it carries the biggest lesson, and it leads straight into the trick I promised you at the start. The 5th design is the Katie Krogan 42. This one came a little later, designed by a naval architect named James Krogan and introduced in 1977, and it was built around one radical, old-fashioned idea. It was a true full-displacement trawler, meaning it wasn't designed to go fast at all. It was designed to go slowly, efficiently, and forever. Most boats today are built to plane, to get up on top of the water and race across it, burning enormous amounts of fuel to do it. The Krogan 42 refused to play that game. It sits down in the water and pushes through it, at a gentle pace, sipping fuel so slowly that owners have crossed entire oceans in these boats. There are documented voyages of Krogan 42s crossing the Atlantic on a single load of fuel. Let that sink in. A boat you can still buy used, crossing an ocean, on one tank. When I understood that, something clicked for me about the whole decade. The 1970s had the oil crisis. Fuel prices shocked the world, and these builders responded not by making flashier boats, but by making smarter, tougher, more efficient ones. They built for a world where you couldn't waste. That mindset, that respect for resources and for the long haul, is stamped into every one of these hulls. And it's the exact mindset the throwaway culture that came after tried to erase. So here I was, 5 boats deep, completely converted from a skeptic into a believer. But I still had one practical problem left, and maybe you're thinking it too. If these old boats are so good, but the industry got so good at hiding weakness behind shiny gel coat, how does a regular person tell a truly solid hull from a rotten one? How do you know if the strength is real or just paint? That question sent me to the oldest surveyors I could find, and one of them taught me the trick that changes everything. This is the finale I promised you. It's called the coin tap test, or the hammer sounding test, and marine surveyors have relied on it since at least the 1960s, back when fiberglass boats were brand new and nobody had fancy electronic gear to inspect them. I found it described in old surveying references and confirmed by professional inspectors who still swear by it today. It costs you nothing. All you need is a coin or a small plastic-faced hammer and your own 2 ears. Here's how it works, and here's why it's almost magic. You take the coin and you tap it against the hull or the deck, moving along steadily, tapping every few inches, and you listen. Where the fiberglass is solid, fully saturated, and healthy, you'll hear a sharp, bright, ringing sound. A clean, hard, high note. That's the sound of good glass, the sound of a 1970s Grand Banks or Hatteras hull. But where there's a problem, where water has crept into a core, where the layers have separated, where there's rot or a void hiding under the surface, the sound changes completely. It goes dull, dead, a flat, hollow thud, like tapping on a rotten log or a hollow drum. Your ear can hear the difference instantly, even if your eyes see nothing but perfect, shiny gel coat on the surface. That's the whole secret. The boat cannot lie to your ears even when it lies to your eyes. All that clever gel coat and marketing that hides weakness on a modern hull is defeated by a schoolchild's coin and a careful listener. A rotten spot the size of a dinner plate can hide under paint that looks flawless, and the tap test will find it in 2 seconds. I tried it myself on that old trawler in the boatyard, the one that started all of this. I tapped my way from bow to stern, and the whole hull rang like a bell, one clean, bright note after another, all the way down. Then, just to teach myself the difference, I walked over to a 15-year-old production boat with a cord hull, and I tapped along her waterline, and there it was. In 3 separate spots, the ring died into a dull thud. Water in the core. Hidden damage. On a boat less than a third the age of the one that rang like a bell. That was the moment I finally, completely understood what that yard manager meant. They don't make the glass this thick anymore. And now I could prove it with a coin. So this weekend, if there's a boat you're curious about, or an old fiberglass anything, take a coin and listen for yourself. Learn the bright ring and the dead thud. Once you hear the difference, you'll never be fooled by a shiny surface again, on a boat or anywhere else. That's a piece of knowledge the surveyors kept alive while the marketing men hoped you'd forget it, and now it belongs to you. What we really recovered here isn't 5 old boats. It's the memory of a time when things were built by people who wanted them to last, and the simple power to tell the real thing from the fake with nothing but your own senses. If you're the kind of person who trusts what's been tested by decades of hard use over whatever's shiny in the showroom this year, then you already understand these boats better than most people ever will. You value what's honest and built to last, and that puts you in rare company. Now I want to hear from you. Of these 5, which one would you take across an ocean? The Grand Banks, the DeFever, the Hatteras, the Chris Craft Roamer, or the Katie Krogan? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because I read every single one, and I love knowing who's out there listening. Don't be shy, just leave a word or two. It matters more than you know. And if you believe, like I've come to believe, that the old ways of building things were often the better ways, then come along with me. We're a growing group of people, digging up the knowledge that convenience and marketing tried to bury, one forgotten skill at a time. Stick around, because next I'm going to show you the forgotten diesel engines from that same era that mechanics quietly call million-mile engines, and the one maintenance habit that keeps them running for 50 years. You won't want to miss what I found. This video gave you the overview, but to go further, join me inside the Old Ways Almanac. That's where I walk through all 5 of these 70s hulls, spec by spec, with the full inspection walkthrough. In there you can ask me your own boat questions directly, and I answer you myself, not some machine. Folks like you are already sitting with me inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel any time. One click, no risk.